Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley, everybody. Pastor Rob Eller here with your Thursday episode. So for today's episode, I thought I would dig back into my sermon archives and find a sermon that I haven't recorded for this podcast yet. And I happen to remember that there was a sermon I was going to do, probably about 4 months ago, when something else came up and that took precedence for the Thursday episode. So this sermon comes from the 5th Sunday of Epiphany on February 5th. And this is just before I started the podcast. But this sermon, I feel like, even though it's from the season of Epiphany, it's good for any season, really. So let's get started with the readings. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 5th chapter. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. In the last few years, especially during the pandemic, my wife and I really got into watching cooking shows and cooking competitions. It kind of exploded when we purchased a streaming subscription to Discovery Plus and suddenly had access to all of the Food Network shows ever made. We dove in headfirst and binge-watched Chop, anything with Guy Fieri or Alton Brown, the various iterations of the Iron Chef series, and whatever else caught our interest. We got into this habit of watching shows while we're eating dinner. Anyways, one of the most common complaints we've seen, and I'm sure you have too from the judges on these shows, is not enough or too much salt. It's such a common refrain that it almost becomes predictable when we're watching the shows. Salt is a basic component of cooking and baking because it helps enhance and suppress certain flavors in food such as sweetness, savory, bitterness. One trick I learned as a barista at Starbucks was that salt can mute the bitterness of coffee. But that only works if you use just the right amount. Otherwise, what you're eating or drinking will taste like it was soaked in ocean water. And there's more than just the basic table salt. Go into any grocery store and you'll find all sorts of varieties, from coarse kosher salt, fine ground popcorn salt, and various colors from different regions of the world, each with a unique flavor or use. Salt was so important in the ancient world that at times it was even more valuable than gold. Today, that can seem pretty outrageous considering nowadays we use salt to melt the ice on our roads in winter and on our water softeners at home, as well as other industrial uses. But in the ancient world, it was the primary way to preserve food since refrigeration hadn't been invented yet. Even today, salt-cured food is still popular for people doing outdoor activities or for emergency food supplies. This gospel lesson continues the Sermon on the Mount as Jesus is teaching the disciples about who he is as a Messiah and what they need to do as his disciples. Today's reading at first glance seems disjointed because it contains short anecdotes that appear unrelated to each other and a bit about the law at the end. I have to imagine this is in part because what we have as the sermon manuscript, if you will, is incomplete. Jesus says we're the salt of the earth in one verse, and in the next he says we're the light of the world. I wish there was more explanation about being salt, so I'll try to fill in the blanks for us before we move on to light. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored?" What a strange thing to compare us to say that we're not just salt, but the salt of the earth. Now, I'm not saying that we're salty, which is slang for annoyed or upset. However, I'm sure Jesus was pretty salty with his disciples frequently not listening to him. Instead, when you say someone is a salt of the earth person, you're saying that they are the type of person who deals with difficult or demanding situations without making any unnecessary fuss, or a good and honest person. Okay, that makes sense based on the fact that it's from the Bible. But what did Jesus really mean by that? Well, salt enhances flavor, as I said. So it could be that if we are salt, we are to enhance or lift up others. Salt doesn't exist for itself. We don't eat salt by itself, so we must exist for the sake of others and not ourselves. Douglas Hare, in his commentary on Matthew, suggests that we substitute another spice so that we are reminded that the statement refers not to status, as if it said, "You are the world's ethical elite," but to function. You must add zest to the life of the whole world. This saying of Jesus serves as a warning to the disciples. If they deny their mission in nature, they'll be thrown out as useless, just like salt that loses its saltiness is thrown out. And salt loses this quality not by some miracle, but by being mixed with other elements and impurities. Therefore, if we let our mission become muddled with other influences, we will lose our way. The other phrase does get some more explanation, that we are the light of the world. It seems a bit odd at first because in John's Gospel, Jesus said that he was the light of the world. Light is a common theme we encounter throughout the Gospel and the Bible as a whole. One that we read quite a bit about during Advent and Christmas. When Jesus wants us to be light, he wants us to dispel the darkness, to provide clarity, and to illuminate the way. In my office, I have a letterboard that I put various verses on that help me focus, and I'll change it out seasonally. During Epiphany, I have from John 1:5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." That light in verse 5 is referring to Jesus, but based on the gospel today, can it also refer to us as well? Light is supposed to be seen and not hidden. Otherwise, that light is as useless as a screen door on a submarine or a city that was built on a hill that was kept out of sight. The whole reason you build a city on a hill is so that it will be seen. When Jesus said for us to be the light, he was saying that we were not lit for our sake, but for the sake of the world, because the function of light is not for it to be seen, but for the light to let other things be seen. Douglas Hare continued in his commentary, "How can the church be described as the light of the world? In a derived sense only. It is only as the church generally proclaims Christ as Lord that it is not by mouthing theological platitudes, but by manifesting his life in its life, that the church can truly be the light of the world. The church needs to remember constantly that it is in fact not the light, but only the window through which the light is to be seen." In other words, the church is only the light when we are the light, since we are the church. And since we are the light, we are meant to be visible and shine that light on what we do and what others are doing. That is why we are salt and light. Not for our benefit, not for our own personal glory, but for the benefit of those around us. Jesus brought the light into a darkened world so that we would be saved through the light. That is why in baptism we light the Paschal candle, to signify the light of Christ among us, and we light an individual candle for the newly baptized to symbolize the passing of that light, that salvation to our new sibling in Christ. And as we hand that candle to the parents of the baptized, we say that verse from Matthew, "Let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." That light is an outward sign of who we're called to be and what we're called to do. As Isaiah reminds us, "Your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. If you offer food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the new day." When we do good, our light, the light from Christ, will shine forth and break through the darkness of this world. When we do, as Isaiah said, and loose the bonds of injustice, undo the thongs of the yoke, let the oppressed go free, break every yoke, and share our bread with the hungry, bring the homeless poor into our houses, and when we see the naked, to cover them. Is that not spreading the light that was given to us? Is that not what we are called as Christians to do? Not just spread the gospel message, but to help those in the margins, to help those who don't have enough, to help those who have been ignored or persecuted? Are we not called to be the salt of the earth, to lift up the lowly, not for our sake, but for others? We can say we're good and faithful Christians until we're blue in the face, but until we actually act on it, it doesn't mean a thing. Because as James reminds us in his letter, faith without works is dead. Or as my late friend and colleague Ben Austin would say, prayer without action is just psychobabble. Whenever I hear the phrase thoughts and prayers after a tragedy, it makes me groan, because it makes our faith performative. It's not enough to say the right thing, but we need to follow it up with doing the right thing as well. Jesus reminded his disciples that just because the Messiah had arrived, it didn't mean the laws were suddenly gone and that all their obligations were wiped out. There was still work to be done. And there's still work to be done by us. When we are called to be the light, we are called to share the light of Christ and to shine a light on the injustices in the world and to expose those who wish to cause harm. We are called to follow in the footsteps of Jesus by helping those in need, flipping the tables of those who take advantage of others, and proclaiming the good news that is meant for all. Be the light and salt for others. Don't hide it, so that the world may know who it is we are called to be. And all of God's people said, Amen. Thank you for tuning in today for this sermon that is relevant any time of the year. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast. We are now available on multiple platforms: Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. Share this good news with your friends and family. God's peace be with all of you. Have a blessed day.